You wake, and the first thing that greets you is not the hymn of duty, nor the Emperor's light, nor the familiar tick of the ship's chronometer. What greets you is silence. A silence so sharp it feels alive, pressing against your skin like cold steel. It is the kind of absence you cannot name, but once you notice it, you cannot ignore it. Like a missing tooth, your tongue keeps searching for the void, gnaws at you with every breath. My name is Lucien Veillard. For 12 years, I served aboard the Righteous Indignation, a dictator-class cruiser that had carried the Imperium's banner for centuries. On Baka, where I was forged as an officer, they taught us that hesitation was heresy and efficiency was prayer. And I believed it. I believed every oath, every litany, every drilled response carved into my marrow. But the void between stars does strange things to a man. You do not notice the erosion as it begins, only a single word of prayer, feeling hollow, a single order spoken without conviction. Then one morning you wake and realize the faith that once defined you has gone pale and brittle, and in its place stands a silence that refuses to be ignored. Victory was supposed to feel glorious. That was what the catechisms promised, what the chaplains drilled into us since childhood. Triumph brings the warmth of the Emperor's blessing, the certainty of his approval. And yet when the Orc Raiders' hulk broke apart under our batteries, when the enemy's screams faded into the void, I felt nothing. The ship roared with jubilation. Steel corridors trembled beneath the rhythm of stomping boots and shouted litanies. Men and women stained with blood and sweat clutched each other in wild embraces, their voices echoing like a choir of the victorious. But I stood apart. Alone in my quarters with the viewport stretched wide before me, I stared at the cold scatter of stars. I pressed my palm against the bulkhead, feeling the bite of its ridged surface. The sensation was sharp, immediate, almost painful. For the first time in weeks, I felt alive. That night, the dream came. It did not arrive like other dreams, those blurred half-memories of duty and battle. No, this dream was vivid, crystalline, more real than waking life. I found myself standing in a vast chamber of impossible geometry, a cathedral that could not exist, its walls flowing in patterns that bent perspective until up and down no longer had meaning. Every surface glowed faintly, each with its own texture of sound. Some hummed like plucked strings, others pulsed like a heartbeat. Still others whispered with voices too soft to catch. The air itself shimmered with a taste, honey laced with copper, sweet and metallic, clinging to the back of my tongue. And then the voice. It did not boom like a god's thunder, nor hiss like a demon in the stories. It was melodic, almost tender a tone, so precise it vibrated in my bones. Lucien, it said, and hearing my name spoken with such perfect resonance was like discovering a part of myself I had never known existed. The syllables caressed me, drew me closer, made me hunger. You thirst, the voice continued. You ache for something beyond the gray monotony of duty. What has obedience given you? Endless repetition, hollow victories, prayers that turn to ash on your tongue. I can show you more. I can give you sensations that would make saints weep with joy, ecstasies that eclipse duty, revelations sweeter than salvation. I wanted to speak to reject the temptation as the catechisms demanded, but the words froze in my throat. My oaths, my training all seemed brittle, fragile, like parchment crumbling in fire. The voice wrapped around me like silk sliding across bare skin. It did not command, it invited. It did not threaten, it promised. I awoke gasping, my heart hammering as if I had run a marathon through the void itself. The dream clung to me like perfume, thick and intoxicating. I tried to dismiss it as stress, the fatigue of long years of war. And yet when I stood before the mirror to shave, the razor's blade kissed my cheek, a fraction deeper than usual. The sting was exquisite, a jolt of raw vitality. I pressed harder, watching a bead of blood bloom bright red against pale flesh. It hurt, but the pain was not punishment. It was proof that I was still real. That day, the corridors of the righteous indignation seemed different. The hymns of the machine spirits echoed with hidden harmonies. The vibration of the deck beneath my boots hummed like a secret song only I could hear. Every sound, every texture, every fleeting scent carried a richness I had never noticed. It was as if the veil of duty had been lifted, revealing a hidden world of sensation beneath the surface of imperial routine. I should have reported the dream. I should have confessed to the chaplain, begged for cleansing, scourged myself until my skin bled prayers. That was the way of the faithful. But instead, I kept silent, not out of fear of punishment, but because deep within, I wanted to dream again. I wanted to hear that voice pronounce my name once more, to taste copper and honey in the air, to stand inside that impossible cathedral of sound and geometry. The silence that had haunted me was gone now. In its place was anticipation trembling and electric. Something had touched me in the darkness, and I was no longer empty. And though I told myself it was nothing a trick of exhaustion, I knew the truth. This was only the beginning. The steel of the ship, the very bones of the righteous indignation, no longer felt inert. They vibrated faintly beneath my fingers as I walked as though alive, as though whispering. When I pressed my ear against the cold bulkhead, I could swear I heard it, the faintest echo of that same melodious tone, patient and persuasive. The ship itself was learning to sing, and I, poor, faithful Lucien Veillard, had begun to listen. I told myself the dream was nothing, a byproduct of fatigue, too many years in the void. But lies have weight, and this one grew heavier each day I carried it. The silence that had once haunted me no longer felt empty. It vibrated now like strings plucked by unseen fingers. Walking the corridors of the righteous indignation, I began to notice harmonies in the most mundane of sounds. The groan of stressed metal during a course correction, the rumble of plasma reactors bleeding their fury into the ship's bones. Even the hiss of recycled air carried a rhythm, a pulse. It was as if the vessel itself sang, and I alone had ears to hear it. At first, I feared I was losing my mind. I lingered in engineering galleries longer than duty required, pretending to check conduits while really pressing my palm against warm piping, savoring the vibrations like notes in a hidden symphony. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself it was curiosity. But in truth, it was hunger. The hunger spread. A cup of recaf, something I had consumed mechanically for a decade, suddenly bloomed across my tongue like an exotic flower, bitter roots unfolding into sharp sweetness. A sliver of bread from the mess hall carried layers of texture I had never known existed. Even the uniform I wore each day became a source of sensation, coarse threads scraping against my wrists, fabric tightening across my shoulders, each brush of cloth against skin, a reminder that I was alive. And then pain, not the crude agony of battle wounds, but the delicate sting of control. A stylus pressed into my palm until it left a welt. Fingernails dragging across my wrist just hard enough to redden flesh. Each small injury felt like punctuation in the dull sentence of my existence, sharp, precise, and infinitely more real than the hollow triumphs of battle. It was during this period that my subordinates began to notice the change. Not the transformation itself, they lacked the perception, but its effects. My words carried weight they had not carried before. When I spoke, even simple reprimands landed differently. I discovered that by altering tone cadence and rhythm, I could turn correction into caress and praise into revelation. The first time I saw it clearly was during a drill inspection. A rating had mishandled his las rifle, sloppy, inattentive. By the old me, the faithful officer of Baka, the response would have been sharp rebuke, perhaps lashes. Instead, I let my voice soften, drawing out syllables, as though I were speaking a prayer. Discipline, I told him, isn't just obedience. It is beauty. The words were nothing extraordinary, but the way they slid from my tongue, measured, deliberate, resonant, made the man's eyes widen. He looked at me as though I had opened a door in his mind. His back straightened, his breath quickened, and when I dismissed him, he moved with a fervor that bordered on worship. That moment terrified me. And yet I could not deny the thrill that coursed through me. It was not only I who had changed, my presence itself was becoming infectious, a drug, and the crew unknowingly had begun to crave it. The chapel confirmed my suspicion. During evening prayers, while Chaplain Mauricus thundered his litanies, I heard something else beneath his words, a counterpoint melody, sweet and seductive, turning rote devotion into something near sensual. The incense, once sharp with sanctity, now carried undertones of spices I had never smelled. Around me, officers muttered their responses with practiced discipline, but their faces were pale, rigid, lifeless. Only I heard the music. Only I tasted the perfume. Only I trembled with anticipation. I should have prayed for deliverance. Instead, I embraced the gift. In my quarters, I began to experiment as a man might with a new weapon. The angle of light across bulkhead panels, the taste of recycled water held in the mouth longer than necessary, the contrast of hot breath against chilled metal. Each sensation catalogued with the precision I had once reserved for tactical reports. Every new discovery fed the hunger, and the hunger only deepened. It was never enough. My hands shook with expectation during each exploration. My pulse raced not in battle, but in solitude chasing the next revelation. And though part of me whispered warnings, another part, the louder part, exulted in the discovery that the universe was more than duty, more than faith, more than gray monotony. The void between stars had not hollowed me out. It had tuned me. I was no longer a servant of silence. I was its instrument, and the music was only beginning. The righteous indignation never truly slept. Even when the corridors fell quiet, the ship hummed with the ceaseless devotion of its machine spirits. To most, the faint static of Vox channels was nothing more than background noise. To me, it had become a siren song. I lingered in the communications chamber long after my duties had ended, surrounded by towers of blinking consoles. Fingers moved across dials and switches, not in obedience to protocol, but in pursuit of something else. Something hidden. Each adjustment stripped away a layer of meaningless static until patterns emerged, delicate, deliberate, unmistakable. The chaos between frequencies was not chaos at all. It was music. Soft at first, almost imperceptible, the tones coiled into harmonies too intricate to be coincidence. They resonated in my chest, tightened the skin on my arms, with gooseflesh made my breath shallow. I closed my eyes and let the sounds wash over me. Notes curved into sensations, sensations into images. I saw corridors alive with flowing light bulkheads breathing like lungs. The ship itself was no longer a vessel, it was an orchestra, and I was its chosen audience. Then came the voice. Not whisper this time, not suggestion, but clarity, sharp as glass. Lucien. My name rippled through the chamber, bypassing my ears and searing directly into my bones. Sweet and terrible honey poured over shards. It filled me with equal parts dread and longing. You have listened, it said. You have tasted fragments of truth, but you hunger for more. You ache to tear down the veil. I can guide you beyond these shadows. All I ask is trust. I tried to resist. Every prayer, every oath I had sworn thundered in my skull, reject, denounce, call for the chaplain. My lips trembled, forming words of loyalty that would not come. I was drowning in the sound, the perfume of its promises. You have been faithful, the voice coaxed, but faith without fulfillment is nothing but starvation. Let me feed you. Let me show you the beauty behind duty. Let me awaken what the Emperor's chains have buried. I knelt. Not from reverence, but because my legs could no longer hold me. The floor was cold against my knees, yet the chill was exquisite, sharpening every nerve ending. Shadows swam on the chamber walls, shapes shifting into geometries that hurt to look at, but whispered truths my mind strained to grasp. And in the dark, I whispered back, just 2 words, fragile and final. I accept. The world convulsed. My senses flared open like a wound. The chamber's shadows bled color I had never seen. I tasted emotions in the air, fear lingering from previous operators, longing clinging like perfume to the metal consoles. Every breath was a symphony, every heartbeat a drum. I could feel the pulse of the ship itself as though it were my own. I should have been horrified. Instead, joy surged through me, vast and consuming. For the first time in years, I did not feel hollow. I felt infinite. When I rose, I was not the same man who had entered. My eyes traced patterns in the static glow of monitors, finding beauty where others saw only data. My voice, when I muttered routine confirmations, carried undertones I had not intended, cadences that curled through the chamber like velvet, resonant, persuasive. The silence that had haunted me was gone. In its place was a presence, patient and powerful, breathing with me, through me, within me. From that moment, I knew corruption was not something forced upon me. It was something I had chosen, and in choosing, I had been reborn. Battle was routine. Boarding actions, room-to-room purges, the brutal rhythm of Imperial war. It was nothing new to me. I had killed before always, with efficiency, never with hesitation. Each strike of the blade, each pull of the trigger, was prayer through action. Or so I had been taught. But this time was different. We had breached the hull of a heretic raider, its corridors reeking of incense and madness. My squad cut through their defenders with practiced precision, bolters barking hymns of destruction. In the chaos, I cornered one of them, a woman scarred with symbols carved into her flesh, her eyes wide with fanatic delirium. She should have died quickly. A single thrust, a clean execution, an end in accordance with the Tactica Imperialis. My arm lifted blade ready to finish her, but something in me hesitated, not from mercy, but from fascination. Her fear was a sculpture. The way her lips trembled, the way sweat glistened on mutilated skin, the way her pupils dilated in the dim light. Each detail was a note in a melody only I could hear. I lowered the killing stroke. Instead, I drew the blade across her shoulder, shallow, precise. She screamed, and the sound struck me like music. High, piercing, layered with raw terror. My pulse quickened. I cut again, slower this time, tracing lines across her arm as though painting on canvas. Every cry shifted in pitch, in tone, in depth, until the chamber itself echoed with a symphony of agony. 17 minutes. That was how long it lasted. Each cut carefully measured, each pause deliberate, savoring every note. Her voice broke and reformed ragged gasps, turning into almost song. My hands shook, not from exertion, but from ecstasy. I was not killing. I was composing. And in her final moments, when breath rattled from her chest, her eyes met mine. No hatred, no defiance, only understanding. A whisper of gratitude slipped from her lips, so faint I thought I imagined it. Gratitude for what I had given her. When the last note faded, I stood trembling over her body. My blade dripped crimson, catching the dim light like liquid rubies. To my squad, who arrived moments later, I was nothing more than a victorious commander standing over a fallen foe. They saw discipline, loyalty, triumph. But I knew the truth. The boundaries between myself and the universe had dissolved in that chamber. In her screams, I had tasted transcendence. In her death, I had glimpsed something purer than duty, deeper than faith. It was not horror that filled me, it was hunger. Normal sensation was no longer enough. Routine victory felt gray and lifeless compared to the vibrant harmony of that prolonged kill. I craved it, even as the echoes still clung to my ears. As we regrouped my squad, none the wiser, I flexed my blood-stained hand. The skin tingled, hypersensitive, alive with aftershocks of ecstasy. The void between stars no longer seemed empty. It throbbed with possibility. I had stepped across a threshold I could never return from. What began as whispers had become music. What began as curiosity had become devotion. And I, Lucien Vieillard, officer of the Imperial Navy, was no longer a servant of discipline. I was an artist, and blood was my instrument. The hive city of Malthus Prime was wrought-made monumental spires of rust and poison, stabbing upward into a blood-colored sky. But Spire Luxuria, That was something different. Even before we breached its gates, I could feel the resonance, calling from within, tugging at my chest like a heartbeat, not my own. We entered cautiously, weapons raised, but the deeper we climbed, the more reality shifted. Walls once adorned with noble heraldry had been carved into flowing organic shapes, patterns that rippled when viewed from the corner of the eye. The air was thick, heavy with incense that smelled of both spice and sweat, of sanctity twisted into desire. Shadows bent in ways that made perspective a lie. My squad muttered prayers, unease tightening their voices, but they followed me because by then their loyalty was no longer to the Emperor. It was to me. At last we reached the ballroom, or rather what had been one. The vast chamber had been remade into a temple of sensation. Cushions and silks of impossible colors littered the floor, their hues glowing as if lit from within. Mirrors lined the walls, yet they did not reflect our bodies. Instead, each surface showed visions of secret hunger, fragments of desire too intimate to admit even to ourselves. The air vibrated with chanting harmonies that blurred the line between worship and moan. And there at the center stood the altar, a slab of obsidian polished to a mirror's brightness, its surface crawling with shifting sigils that hurt to look at. They changed with every glance, geometries that bypassed thought and struck directly at the soul. Around it knelt the cultists, not enemies but supplicants, their faces uplifted in rapture. When I stepped forward, their voices rose in unison, a single word stretched into eternity. Welcome. Their leader approached a woman whose beauty had been sharpened beyond mortal limits, her skin pale as ivory, her eyes glittering with unearthly fire. She smiled, extending her hands. We have been waiting for you, Lucienne Veillard. She has prepared us for your arrival. I should have ordered my squad to open fire, should have purged the heresy in flame and steel, but my feet betrayed me, carrying me forward as though drawn by chains of silk. Every step intensified the pull. The altar's surface seemed to hum, matching the rhythm of my heart. I reached out. The instant my palm touched the stone, the universe fractured. A surge of ecstasy, violent and overwhelming, tore through me. The whispers that had haunted my dreams became a roar of perfect clarity. She was here. Not voice, not shadow, but presence. Vast, terrible, exquisite. Beloved Lucienne, she sang, every syllable slicing and soothing at once. You have walked the path with such hunger, such grace, and now you are mine. Visions poured into me. Palaces of sensation where music could kill the unprepared, where every breath was pleasure, where pain and joy dissolved into one perfect whole. I saw myself radiant, no longer human features, sharpened into unbearable beauty, skin glowing with inner light. When I opened my eyes, my squad was already on their knees. Their faces were transformed not with fear, but with desperate longing. They had seen my reflection in the altar, seen what I had become, and recognized it as superior. I turned my voice, carrying undertones that bypassed thought and ignited need. We have found something greater than duty, greater than the Emperor's cold promises. We have found truth. One by one, they bowed their heads, surrendering not to the Dark Prince, but to me as her chosen vessel. The corruption spread like wildfire in their eyes, twisting into reverence, into hunger. And in that temple of mirrors, amidst silks and shadows, I ceased to be a mere officer of the Imperial Navy. I became the instrument of Slaanesh. We returned from Spire Luxuria not as soldiers, but as pilgrims. The infection was already in us, woven into our voices, our skin, our eyes. I carried it most of all, but my squad had tasted enough to crave more. When the hangar doors of the righteous indignation closed behind us, we brought corruption aboard, not as plague, but as gift. The changes began subtly. Crew members who passed me in the corridors paused, eyes lingering a fraction too long. Their conversations faltered when I entered a room, not out of fear, but from anticipation, hungry for a word, a glance, anything that might bind them closer to me. I discovered that even silence had power. By saying nothing, by simply looking, I could draw them into orbit around me, like moths circling flame. It spread quickly. The drills and inspections I once conducted with cold precision transformed into rituals. Weapons were no longer checked merely for function, but arranged with artistic symmetry patterns that satisfied the eye as much as the tactica. Punishments ceased to be simple correction. They became performances of sensation, carefully shaped to leave the guilty trembling with gratitude rather than shame. And the crew adored me for it. They competed for my notice. Ratings volunteered for double shifts if it meant working in my presence. Officers lingered after briefings, hoping I might let them bask a moment longer in the cadence of my voice. Even the tech priests, creatures of steel and logic, began incorporating elegance into their labor-engraving filigree, into conduits altering servo-skulls so their flight traced pleasing patterns through the air. I watched the transformation with a mixture of wonder and satisfaction. This was no rebellion. Discipline remained intact, perhaps stronger than ever, but it was no longer fueled by duty, it was devotion. Their loyalty was not to the Emperor. It was to me. Only Captain Alexandros resisted. For weeks he summoned me to his ready room, citing irregularities in crew behavior, whispering concerns of visions of strange harmonics in the machine spirit's hymns. He spoke with authority honed over decades, but his voice carried doubt. And when I smiled, when I let the light catch the subtle patterns I had woven into my uniform, I saw his resolve tremble. One evening, as he pressed me with questions, his frustration cracked. "Lucien," he said, "what is happening to my ship?" I stepped close, placed a hand upon his shoulder. The contact sent a shiver down his frame, his breath catching in his throat. My voice dropped to a whisper, rich with harmonics only I knew how to weave. "Captain, nothing is wrong. Your crew has discovered joy in their service beauty, in their discipline. Is that not what the Emperor desires most?" His lips parted, words lost. The rigid lines of his face softened into longing. For a long moment he fought eyes darting, as if searching for the faith that once held him steady. But faith was brittle. Hunger was stronger. At last he whispered, "Show me." And with those two words, the last barrier fell. From that night, righteous indignation ceased to be a worship in truth. It became a sanctuary. Every routine turned to liturgy, every order to chant every breath of the crew, a prayer not to the Emperor, but to the ecstasy we had found together. The ship sang now, not with the grind of engines, but with voices raised in devotion. Its corridors glowed with subtle alterations, shadows bent into pleasing forms. Incense burners spread fragrances that stirred more than memory. We had become something new, not servants of discipline, not children of the Emperor's silence, but celebrants of sensation. The righteous indignation was no longer a vessel of war. It was a temple soaring through the void, and I, Lucien Villar, was its high priest. Sanctus VII, was a world of stone and prayer, a shrine planet that had withstood centuries of hardship, yet clung to the Emperor with fanatical devotion. Other warlords had tried to break it with fire and blade. They failed. The people of Sanctus would rather burn than bend. But I did not come with fire. We descended not as conquerors, but as benefactors. The word-bearers disguised themselves as traitors, their monstrous forms hidden beneath robes. Our ships bore grain medicines, tools, humanitarian aid for a starving population. On the surface, the reception was wary, but grateful. Hunger softens even the hardest faith. Governor Maltius met me in his hall, a man of conviction carved from stone. His eyes measured every word, his shoulders heavy with the weight of a world's devotion. He expected negotiations of resources and tithes. What he found instead was me. I spoke not of trade, but of beauty. "Governor," I told him, my voice weaving harmonics only I could hear, "survival is not enough. A life of duty alone is ash on the tongue. The Emperor gave us more. He gave us the capacity to feel, to create, to exalt through joy. Why deny what he placed within us? At first, he resisted, his lips pressed into thin lines, his fingers tightening on the armrest of his chair. Temptations, he called them, distractions from service. But doubt flickered in his eyes. I pressed the advantage. I brought him music compositions I had shaped from the hidden harmonies of the void notes that shimmered with impossible resonance. I showed him paintings created by my crew images that seemed to shift as you gazed upon them, reflecting not what you saw, but what you longed for. I read to him words that blurred poetry and prayer, dissolving the line between devotion and desire. Each session with him grew longer. What began as stiff negotiations turned into philosophical debates, then into artistic collaborations. He asked questions he would not have dared voice weeks before. What if pain could be holy? What if beauty was worship? I watched his transformation with the fascination of a craftsman. At first, his faith resisted like iron, but iron under heat bends, and I was the flame. His wife noticed before he admitted it. She saw how his eyes lingered on tapestries he had once ignored, how his tone softened when he spoke of governance as though it were art rather than burden. She remarked on his improved mood, his renewed energy, his strange fascination with color and light. She thought him simply rejuvenated. In truth, he was awakening. 6 months, that was all it took. By then, Sanctus Seventh no longer resembled the austere shrine world it had been. Public rituals remained, but they were transformed. Hymns were accompanied by harmonies that stirred the heart into rapture. Incense carried fragrances that made prayer feel immediate, visceral. Festivals bloomed, blending devotion with creation. And yet the people still claimed loyalty to the emperor. In truth, they were more devoted than ever. But their devotion had been transfigured, seen now, through the lens of sensation, of beauty, of exaltation. They did not believe they were betraying him. They believed they had discovered a deeper truth of his glory. The word-bearers had fought wars for centuries and never seen such swift corruption. They marveled at how easily a world could fall, not through terror, but through joy. I called it not conquest, but enlightenment. Sanctus Seven was proof that the greatest weapon was not the bolter nor the chainsword, but beauty. Beauty that disarmed suspicion, beauty that seduced without resistance, beauty that redefined faith itself. And I, Lucien Veillar, had become its master. The Inquisition came at last. Inquisitor Thaddeus Vex descended upon Sanctus Seven in his black gunship. His armor lacquered with purity, seals his presence, a thundercloud of suspicion. He had purged worlds before. His reputation was legend, unyielding, incorruptible, the blade of the Emperor's wrath. He came expecting blasphemy, laid bare mutants, writhing cults, shrieking cities drenched in vice. He came ready to order exterminatus. What he found instead unsettled him. The governor's palace had become a cathedral of sensation. Tapestries shifted with living patterns that mirrored the moods of onlookers. Floors sang underfoot, mosaics of precious stone, releasing subtle tones with each step. Incense burned in golden braziers, filling the hall, not with smoke, but with clarity, heightening every sense. And the citizens, oh, the citizens, glowed. They prayed with genuine fervor, their voices strong, their faces radiant with joy. They were not rebels. They were not degraded. They were faithful, more faithful than ever, faithful than, Vex's eyes narrowed as I approached him clad in my reimagined uniform, every line of my form sharpened to impossible elegance. His gauntleted hand hovered near the bolt pistol at his side. Lucien Veillar, he intoned, voice ironclad, you stand accused of heresy, of corrupting an imperial world, of leading souls astray from the pure worship of the Emperor. I bowed my head in perfect reverence, letting my voice glide like silk. Inquisitor, look around you. Do you see rebellion here? Do you see despair? These people serve the Emperor more joyfully than ever before. Is devotion not measured by passion? His jaw tightened. They speak of visions, of sensations beyond human ken. These are symptoms of corruption. Or, I countered softly, stepping closer, they are signs of awakening. The Emperor gave humanity the gift of sensation. To deny it is to deny his creation. Is it not worship to embrace the fullness of what he made? He faltered. For a moment, the certainty in his eyes cracked. His hand flexed against the pistol grip, yet he did not draw. Around us, the citizens continued their prayers, children laughing as they wove flowers into patterns, soldiers chanting hymns, with voices trembling not from fear, but from rapture. Vex's voice wavered. If this is true devotion, why does it feel so wrong? I leaned closer, whispering words only he could hear. Because your training taught you to fear joy, to see beauty as temptation. But tell me, Inquisitor, look at them. Have you ever witnessed a world more loyal, more productive, more utterly aflame with love for the Emperor's light? He turned, and his gaze fell upon Governor Maltius, radiant with conviction, declaring, "We have never been more faithful." The delegation echoed him, their voices united, blazing with sincerity. Vex's shoulders sagged. The pistol lowered. His words, when they came, were brittle. I should execute you where you stand. I should cleanse this planet in fire. I smiled, letting warmth and inevitability color my tone. But you will not. His silence was the proof. He looked once more upon the people, their joy undeniable, their faith unbroken. And he knew condemning them would mean condemning proof that devotion could flourish outside orthodoxy. His creed had no answer for beauty. At last he spoke. I will be watching. Any sign of true heresy, and I will return with fire. We both knew he would not. As his gunship lifted into the blood-red sky, the palace resounded with prayers that were both worship and celebration. The Inquisition had come to break us. Instead, it had witnessed our triumph. Sanctus 7 belonged to me now, not through conquest, but through beauty. And Inquisitor Vex had blinked. The gunship of Inquisitor Vex vanished into the horizon, a black speck swallowed by crimson clouds. His threats lingered in the air like fading incense, but his certainty was gone. He had seen what I had wrought, and though his lips muttered warnings, his heart had bent beneath the weight of beauty. I stood upon the highest tower of the governor's palace, the city sprawling beneath me like a tapestry alive with light. Sanctus 7 no longer resembled the austere shrine world it once was. Its streets pulsed with color and song. Towers gleamed with new patterns etched into stone artistry woven into architecture. Even the farmlands beyond the city had been reshaped fields planted in designs that bloomed into living murals visible from orbit. The people moved with purpose, but no longer from obligation. Every step, every gesture was touched by devotion and joy. Children laughed as they played games of creation, painting prayers onto walls. Workers sang as they labored each hammer stroke in rhythm with a greater harmony. Soldiers drilled not as automata, but as dancers in a choreography of steel, their discipline transformed into art. This was what Slaanesh had promised, and what I had delivered. I whispered the truth aloud, my voice carried by the wind across the city. Not damnation, but awakening. The words tasted sweet, heavy, with finality. I had not been corrupted. I had been liberated, reshaped into something beyond human frailty. Through me, the people of Sanctus 7 had discovered that worship could be rapture, that duty could be beauty, that the Emperor's light could shine brighter when refracted through the prism of sensation. The ecclesiarchy would call it blasphemy. The Inquisition would call it heresy. Let them. Their judgments were chains, and chains once broken could never bind again. I looked skyward where the righteous indignation hung in orbit. No longer a mere warship, it was now a sanctum, its hull engraved with designs that shifted under starlight, its corridors alive with song and fragrance. My crew were no longer soldiers, they were celebrants, their eyes shining with the hunger I had awakened in them. They would follow me anywhere. And there were so many worlds yet to awaken. I saw them in my mind's eye, hive cities suffocating under gray duty, agri-worlds beaten into lifeless repetition, forge worlds drowning in sterile function, all waiting for the spark of beauty, all waiting for the contagion of sensation. We would bring it to them, not through conquest, not through rebellion, but through the irresistible truth of joy. The administratum would falter when they saw productivity soar under my methods. The ecclesiarchy would stammer when they heard hymns sung with a fervor deeper than fear. Even the mechanicus would be forced to acknowledge that elegance outperformed utility. The Imperium would not collapse. It would transform. Through me, the fire of Slaanesh would spread not as corruption, but as revelation, a contagion too alluring to resist. I spread my arms to the horizon, letting the wind catch my voice, my declaration. I am Lucian VAR. Once a servant of silence, now the herald of harmony. Once bound by duty, now liberated by beauty. Through me the galaxy will awaken. Through me the Imperium will become art. Below the city answered cheers, hymns, chants rising as one. The sound was not obedience. It was devotion. It was love. And I knew as the stars called to me with their endless promise that this was only the beginning.